All right, folks, it's been a little bit since you heard this. Hopefully you checked out my latest episode from last week, which was about selecting beers to go with the holidays. And if not, well, it's past all Thanksgiving, so you're going to have to catch up and do it for Christmas. So anyway, I hope that helped. New wrinkle to the channel. This is Mike. Say hello, Mike.
Hi, everybody.
This is Mike Munhall, a good friend of mine, the guy who got me back into brewing after a long hiatus. So all this you can blame on him. But Mike's going to help me out, and he's going to be joining the channel from time to time, if not all the time. We'll see how much I can get him to do. So we have a really interesting topic because you guys have seen my setup with the 2-vessel deal back and forth. And I know I haven't gone through the mashing stuff that I'm going to do. We'll get to all that. But here's the deal. Mike used to have a very similar setup, and he just went to this new Grainfather that is really, really popular. It's the most single vessel system that's sold in America, and it's gaining around the world as well. And I'm really interested, before we even get into the details of it, what made you want to change from your classic 3-vessel system?
Right. There were a lot of reasons. The biggest reasons were this. I was making good beers, but there are two things that I couldn't do really well. One was step mashing. With my picnic cooler setup, I was really just limited on what I could do on the mash, right? Adding boiling water to a mash is just hard. It's hard to get that right. I also wanted, I wasn't getting clear wort. I was having a hard time filtering out trub and hops at the end of the boil. I tried what was it called? The trub trapper. Remember that thing?
Yeah, right.
But in my kettle, that was just hard to get right. The screens weren't working. So these are actually not hard problems to solve, right? You can upgrade your equipment to do that. But in order for me to do that, it was going to cost me probably another $600 to, get another burner, get another kettle to be able to mash in outside of the picnic cooler. Right. Everything told, it was just going to cost like about $600. I was like, why am I spending all the money to do that when I can just look into an all-in-one system? So that's what actually made me start researching the system. So I looked at all sorts of stuff, but one thing I did not want to sacrifice was control of the brewing process or my recipe. Was not going to give that up, right? So there are a number of systems out there that do just fine. Grainfather was, I chose Grainfather just for the automation. There are a couple of the bells and whistles out there, but those are the two primary reasons. But I also got a couple other big benefits out of it too, right? Smaller footprint. Yep. I reclaimed an entire corner of my garage, and the automation itself was worth the extra $300 or $400 over. I think I was looking at Brew as well. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's the short version of the story of how I got from my old system, that big giant DIY kit, to the Grainfather, which is what I'm using now.
And it's important that you say that because it is DIY. Mm-hmm. And everyone's is, unless you go in and you spend all this money up front. But right. I will warn you folks, for those of you, I know more and more of you are seasoned home brewers, but for those of you that are just thinking about getting into it, I will caution you. When I geared up, I knew where I was going. So I bought enough and designed the system so that I could do all these things, that I didn't have to start with one system and then sell it off and go through the pain that Mike had to go through. And I can do similar things, although I don't have as much BTUs to throw at it, so my steps have to be a little bit more calculated, and I have to be careful with it. But it does help, and I've noticed since I went to that system that my work comes out clearer. And I have to say that Charlie was right, and I've learned to be a little bit more patient. So for everybody out there who is struggling with the same thing, just chill, have a beer, it'll be all right. I think you said that to me the very first day that I brewed again. So
that's right.
And we're not telling the horror stories from that day yet. That'll be another episode. But
right.
So you get this thing, you decide to make the change, sell off some of your old gear, whatever, gather up the cash, and at that point, you're ready to make that investment, and you do that, and the thing shows up at the house. And I remember you sent me a picture of it. How did it go getting it out of the box and getting it together?
You know what? It's for an experienced brewer, it's not a big deal, right? You know how the brewing process works. There was a little bit of a couple bumps here, just trying to you unbox it. There's all these weird, pipes and manifolds and valves and stuff. And it's all new. You've never seen it work together. I went through the instructions, put it together. fired it up on brew day. Actually, you know what I did to actually learn how everything worked? You run a cleaning cycle through it. So my first batch that I ran through my Grainfather was a 5-gallon batch of PBW cleaner.
There you go. There you
go. So you learn how it works. It's really not that hard. For somebody that's been, doing all grain brewing for a while, it's not hard to pick that up. It was pretty easy. Came almost pretty much assembled, minus a couple things that you had to screw together. It's a brainless system. It was really nice. It may be daunting for somebody that's never done all grain brewing before.
Okay.
Right. I would absolutely recommend diving into some YouTube videos, finding out how other people use it before you just go try to tackle your first brew. I'm actually surprised that Grainfather doesn't have some better videos for people that are absolutely green to brewing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the videos that they have, it's definitely marketed to people that are getting into brewing for the first time.
Really? I find that interesting that you would throw a system like that with that volume at someone completely foreign to the concept.
Yeah. At least that's my impression, right? I would expect some better tutorials, better instruction, other than the manual that you get and the videos that are on their website. But all things told, I don't think anybody would have a hard time picking it up if they were brewing for the first time. They just have to spend the time to learn what they're doing. You're not just going to be able to unbox it and make a beer the first day.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because that's really the concept of it. And people have heard me talk about Pico, and folks, we'll get into Pico as we go down the road. And it sounds like a good thing for us to do going forward would be to give you some of those more instructive videos about this. And when I get to sit and watch a Grainfather brew day, it sounds like I'll have plenty of time to drink. So I'm all for that.
Right.
And I really enjoy the concept of, I'm a fiddler. I am constantly playing with the induction burner strength to make sure that I'm hitting those steps. And the more that I go, an old protein rest is probably outside of what you need to do today. And you've heard people say that, and I didn't believe them. I went and I did it for probably 4 or 5 batches just to make sure, and it's true. So don't bother. But I like to tweak, and I hit 3 or 4 different steps just to make sure that I'm hitting all the enzymatic profile levels that I want it all. I like dry beer, and I want as much alcohol out of it in the conversion process as I can get. So I'm pretty steep about it. How did you do, and how do you feel about the way that it works in terms of setting the Grainfather to do what it needs to do, and whether it hits and maintains the temperatures you're looking for?
You know what? You program in your brew day, basically. You can either do it on your phone, as part of your recipe, or just manually on the control box. The temperatures hit perfectly. It did take a long time to warm up, right? On my 110 volt outlet in my garage, heating up the sparge water probably took about an hour. I wasn't expecting that. But as far as like the times and the temperatures, it nailed it. I mean, it was a no-brainer. It did really well.
So are you double checking it with your lava tools or whatever you're using for your independent temperature verification, or are you going with what it gives you?
No, I just go with what it gives me. I did have I struggled with one thing, which was my strike temperature, the strike water temperature. On my DIY kit, right, I would calculate, it's usually 10 degrees higher Fahrenheit, the strike water temperature than your mash temperature. Grainfather doesn't really do that. You program in your mash temperature, and you don't do a strike. You just heat up your water, add your grades. The water will be maybe 3 or 4 degrees lower than what you wanted it to be, but it comes right back up. It's recirculating your mash your mash water, so it comes back up to temp in like 5 or 10 minutes, right? It took me a little while to get over that, right? I just had to just deal, right? It's a 60-minute mash. You're going to be fine having a 55-minute mash at 154 degrees. It was fine.
90-minute mash are nice too.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Just let it
go. So yeah, no, it did really well. It hit. It was really fun to watch each stage of the brewing process just change automatically while I'm just sitting in a chair. My step mash just did it. I didn't really have to do anything. I didn't have to press any buttons. I just programmed it in my phone, hit start, and it did it. The only real manual process was after the mash, you pull that big giant mash bucket out, lock it in, and then you manually sparge. Again, not a very big deal. It was a whole lot less work than I was having to do with my DIY equipment.
So let me ask you about that. A lot of, especially brew-in-a-bag systems, even my mash-in-a-bag system, some people use hoists to get that basket back out of the way. Is that something that you really don't need? I mean, I know that you have a variance. How much was the ABV? How much grain did you use on this first recipe?
So this ended up being about an 8% ABV beer. I used 15 pounds of grain. I didn't mean for it to be 8%. I was actually looking around 7%, but my efficiency just ended up being better than I was expecting, right? I was guessing at the efficiency. But 15 pounds of grain, it handled that really well. I had about 85% efficiency in the end. So yeah, it was, I don't want to say it was a struggle to pull out the 15 pounds of grain plus all of the water that it had absorbed. But, I had to have, heave it out a little bit. It really for, somebody of average strength like myself, it wasn't that big of a deal. You're only lifting it 2 or 3 feet, locking it in, and you're done.
And is it that pivot maneuver where you have a tray on the top of it so you can just sit the basket back on top of that?
Yeah, something like that. So inside the kettle, there's like 4 notches, and you lift it up, you twist it 90 degrees, and it just sets on those notches.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to fiddle with one hand in the basket tray or anything like that?
Nope. No, not at all. Okay. Just 2-hand lift and turn.
That sounds pretty good. I just drained my mash vessel, so I don't care. But it's really interesting to me. I'm trying not to get too distracted by it because the process seems, especially for folks that are watching that are suburban brewers in their garages, basements, just like we are. The convenience of it seems to be maxed out. Like you said, you had to do a couple of steps, right? But other than that, you pretty much enjoy the process from afar.
Yeah, you're sitting a lot more as opposed to actually hands-on working on your beer. But there's also something to be said about the DIY kits, right? If you're, homebrew culture is very DIY, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, if that's your jam and you like building your own equipment or assembling your own your system, an all-in-one kit may not be for you, right? For me, it works out because I like the smaller footprint. I like that it's electric, so I can brew anywhere. So if it's cold in the winter, I can just close my garage door. I don't have to worry about venting because there's no gas.
And so next time you come up here and we film the whole thing, then that should work.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Here's something interesting that I'm kind of still unsure on with Grainfather, or could be just the electrical in my house. So I tripped a breaker maybe 3 or 4 times during my first brew day. So it was interesting because I had everything programmed into my phone and it was actually controlling my brew day. But the power would go out. I'd just go flip the breaker and like kick right back up. It wasn't a big deal. What was impressive was that, I figured like I was right in the middle of my mash. Like, is it going to understand where I was in the mash? Am I going to have to reprogram this? But it didn't. It literally just reconnected, picked right back up where it left off. And that was actually pretty impressive. That was a good test of the software and the system, right?
Yeah.
In failure case. I probably need to have the electrical checked out of my house to see why that was happening. But otherwise, it was a champ. It really was.
I know you have a couple of things on that circuit too. Is there a refrigerator and something else too?
I took everything off. Actually, right there was a freezer on there that was in another outlet. That was the only thing that was running, but that could have contributed. I'm not sure.
Just amperage drop. So who
knows? Yeah. But well, I'll have that checked out. But I can't imagine it was the Grainfather. It was actually drawing that much and tripping the breaker. There must have been something else going on.
Well, total load. That said, total load, this is a good time for me to break in because, folks, I'm behind. I'm going to have to start mine. And you heard us talk about it the other day. I'm going to pour one because I enjoy pouring for the camera.
And I'm already drinking one.
Oh, you're way ahead of me. It's a little trippy pouring over the keyboard of my laptop since that's the setup that I'm using right now. So I'm just going to stop that. But there's the beer of the day before I ruin it. And it's it's something we'll talk about in a little bit, but I want to continue down this road because first impressions of a system like this are always key in developing how you're going to use it going forward. So you get through the mash, you get to the boil. Anything different that you had to go through in hop additions, anything like that in terms of controlling the boil?
No. As far as controlling the boil, sort of loosely related to what you're asking here. One weird thing about the Grainfather is it does not boil hard. It was a really light boil, and I actually looked this up. It sounds like other people complain about the same thing. It's definitely a good boil, but it's not like the big giant roiling boil that you get with a gas burner, 50,000 BTU burner that I was using before, whatever that was. So that was a little bit disconcerting at first, right? But it got through the boil. I mean, it boiled the entire time. I just wish the boil was a little bit harder. Another thing I did was just to try to get clear wort. I used a hop spider, something I had never used before. I don't think that actually had anything to do with the boil rate or anything, but maybe will have a little bit to do with the hop conversion rate.
Right. Yeah. My utilization goes down about 12%.
Yeah. So we'll have to see about that. But I really didn't do anything else that I wouldn't normally do just in, my regular kettle.
Did you find that your boil off changed significantly? Because you're in Colorado, but you're down a lot lower than I am. So our conversion rates for evaporation are different.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still 6,100 feet. So, still boiling off a lot more than you would elsewhere. Hard to tell. So I came up a half gallon short in my first couple batches. I don't know if that's because of the boil off rate or just I have to dial it in a little bit better. I'm not too worried about half gallon. I'll figure out how to reclaim that later on. But I think the boil off rate's got to be a little bit lower, right? Because the boil, it's not nearly as hard of a boil. My old kettle was much wider. This is, more cylindrical and tall. But yeah, these are just things you have to dial in.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because the more you break it in or learn how it works, you get better at generating your recipes in terms of starch conversion, everything else. A couple of end results. We're talking about your first impressions, but I know you've done a couple of batches now. Impressions on efficiency, hop utilization. How are the beers coming out versus how you've planned them?
So they're still fermenting. So, no final verdict. So far, the impressions I have are my wort is definitely clear. But, if you didn't have a problem with clear wort before, then, that's not a big deal to you. But for me, yes, the wort that I produce is much clearer. My efficiency was far better than I was getting out of the picnic cooler, right? Like I said, I'm getting 85% efficiency. I had guessed I was going to get 70% efficiency, but that far exceeded my expectations on these first batches. So that's pretty good, right? So I like making big beers like you do, right? And so I was actually a little bit concerned about what I was going to do. If I could, if I was going to max out at like 14, 15 pounds of grain, I was going to have to figure out another way to make the beers that I like to make. But that doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem. Like the 15 pounds of grain I used on these last batches was totally fine. I can go more. And
so you had to serve there. It was a 5-gallon batch, I assume?
Yeah. Yep. 5-gallon batch.
So you can go up to what 20 pounds? What are you looking at your max?
I think on paper, they say it's just under 20 pounds of grain. I'm thinking that's probably about right. Maybe a little bit less than that, right? I'm thinking probably 17 or 18 pounds. You're probably going to be as much as you want to put in that the
basket.
Yeah, the mash basket, right? But there's other options too. So I just read about a thing called reiterated mashing. So where you actually mash twice. Have you heard about that?
Oh, I call it double mashing, but yes, that's how I make my barley wine now.
Right, exactly, right. So that's a pretty good option. So in reiterated mashing, you mash once, you'll do a sparge or not. It's kind of unclear. Dump your grains and then just mash again, but in the wort that you collected the first time.
Exactly.
It's pretty interesting. So so that's a pretty good option, but obviously it adds a lot of time to your brew day. But another thing that you can do, you know, I mean, for me, I like a lot of Belgian beers, so I'm going to add some sort of candy syrup, or maybe dextrose, depending on the beer. So I don't need 20 pounds of grain, you know, to make a 10% ABV beer. I can start with, you know, 15 pounds and then add that sugar later. So that's good enough for me. Or make a 4-gallon batch.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's options. So yeah, I don't think I'm gonna. I don't think I'm. For those that actually want to make big ABV beers, you have options.
And we're going to get into those because I've told you guys about the step mashing that I haven't gone over. Mike's doing it now as well. So we'll have different thoughts about it on the same process. And we'll get into double mashing, reiterated, whatever you want to call it. Because I have a goal for all of you that are waiting on the barley wine. And Mike and I did our Byler wine together for the first time. We've since diverged a little bit, and I do things a little bit more creepy, but it is what it is. I'm actually aiming at a 20% ABV. So that's why that mash setup, that technique is really involved for me. So we'll get to that as we go down the line. But as you said, you haven't kegged or bottled anything from this Grainfather yet. But I think the end result for the Grainfather, you can't do anything about fermentation. But like you said, you're fermenting now. So big takeaways from your first impressions of Grainfather are clear wort, and is that consistent?
So far, yeah. I mean, I'm using a hop spider, you know, so I'm collecting all the hop trube that I would normally collect in that spider as opposed to into my fermenter. The cold break I would like to have. Right now, you basically chill right into your fermenter, right? That's the general way that they propose that you actually chill your wort right into the fermenter. I would prefer to chill the wort in the boiler so I can leave the cold break behind. Sure. That's what I would like to do. I'm going to try that next. You know, there may be some issues with maybe some congesting up the pump doing that, but we'll see. If I could leave that cold break behind, that would be ideal.
So how does the Grainfather actually go about chilling? Is it a plate chiller within the system, or how does that work?
It is a not an immersion chiller. What's the other one, Ryan?
Plate.
Nope, not a plate chiller.
Counterflow.
Yes.
I'm just going to keep guessing.
Yeah, no, it's a counterflow chiller, and actually, it's really, really efficient too.
Oh, okay.
So I used the Hydra before, and the Hydra was a beast. That chilled from boiling to 70 degrees in like 7 minutes. It was ridiculous.
Folks, that's the one you've seen hanging out of my boil kettle as well.
Right. So depending on your tap water temperature, of course, but this counterflow chiller seemed to be just as efficient. You know, chilling and draining that wort, and you know, pretty quickly. You know, get down to temperature really quick.
So you're happy with that. You're ready to get it into the fermenter. At that point, let's talk about the thing that nobody wants to talk about. You got to clean the thing afterwards. And I've seen your setup, and you are a cleaning maestro. So
right. Brewing is 90% cleaning and 10% actually making beer.
Absolutely. And I think of the guy on Seinfeld that made the soup when I think of you and cleaning your brew equipment. So tell me about how the cleanup is from this system.
You know, it's really not that bad. It's a lot less stuff to clean. You know, it's all integrated. It's all one unit. The mash basket, after your mash, you dump your grains. You just take it to the kitchen, clean it out, and you're done. The kettle itself, after you've collected all your wort in your fermenter, just tip it over, dump out what's left in there, rinse it out, run the pump a little bit just to get everything, all the larger pieces of debris out, dump that out, and then you run a cleaning cycle through there with PBW or whatever your stuff is. It really couldn't be any easier than that.
Okay, which is the same thing that I do, except I have 2 vessels to do it with. So
Right.
it's pretty much the same system. Do you bother? Is there any sensitivity in the system that the size of it or anything? Do you rinse the PBW out with clean water afterwards or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, just like if you're cleaning anything else with PBW, right? You'll let it soak for a little while, and then you'll rinse it with clean hot water. So you do the same thing there. So I'll actually run a second cycle of just a little bit of warm water through it, and then I'll, for good measure, just rinse it again one more time.
Right.
But it's honestly, it's absolutely no harder to clean than all the old equipment, but has to be at least a little bit easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if anybody from Grainfather's listening, this is the moment you want to highlight, because this is what it all comes down to, Mike. Your answer on this question. At the end of the day, how much easier, how much time did you save? What was the end result of switching to this all-in-one?
Man, that's a long that's going to be a hard question to answer.
I got time and beer.
Overall, it's a no-brainer for me, right? Like I said, I didn't lose any control in the brewing process or how I design or develop recipes. The beer that I make now is better than the beer that I could make on my DIY system. That's what matters to me. As a bonus, it's electric, so I can brew anywhere. I don't have to worry about gas. Small, tiny footprint. It definitely simplifies my brew day, right? That's a big deal for me. I want it to be simple. I don't want it to be complicated. Less time, certainly, right? Especially when I can program it to start up at a certain time of day, while I'm still in bed, I can have my mash water heating in the morning.
Shut up.
So that's pretty nice. All things told, it was a no-brainer switch for me. For others that if you really want to be designing and building your own system, that's really a big part of the homebrew culture. May not be for you, but that's okay. For those that just want to simplify and spend a little bit of money, it's not too pricey, but you have to pay for all of that all at once, as opposed to if you're building your DIY system, you can piecemeal it together a little bit at a time.
Sure. And that's exactly what I did the first time around too. And it took a while to get where I was going, and you got to do it all at once. So there's some pluses behind that. So folks, if you have questions, leave your comments below. Hit us on iTunes or on the YouTube channel, wherever you're hearing this. And let us know what you're thinking, or if you have questions, we'll try to get back to you and give you some answers that will help. Before we wrap up, I know we're both drinking this same beer, and this is Anchor's Christmas beer for 2019. And I have a couple of bottles. I have a couple of magnums, actually, of 15 and 7. I think I'm doing the odd years is basically what it is, that we might have to crack and do a tasting for. But this is a beer that I started out with back in college, back when I first got into craft beer, and then I went away from it for a long time and got into whiskeys and higher end liquors rather than beer. What's your impression of this beer, and how much of this are you going to drink here before Christmas?
My impressions of this beer. This is my second pour of this, not today. So I'm honestly not really well versed on holiday beers. Christmas beers, whatever. What are they? Winter warmers?
Yes, that's what I'm calling them.
Right.
Non-denominational winter warmers.
You know what? It's a good seasonal beer. Like I said, I'm not really well versed on winter warmers. You and me and our friends always pick these up and drink these together. Usually high ABV, definitely spiced. Usually, brown or some darker, maybe more malty beer. I like them. Nothing terribly special about it, except that they only sell them, or they're only available around Christmas and the holidays. Yeah, they're fun. I like them. I don't know. Tell me, what are your impressions of these holiday ales and this beer in particular?
This one, and I just put out, folks, if you missed it, I put my top 5 winter warmers here on the last show. And this is up there. I'm not going to give it away in case you haven't seen that one, so go check that out. But This is one of my favorites. And like I said, I've had it over the years. There's a new brewmaster, Scott. And you can hear an interview I did with him a couple of weeks ago before GABF. That's a couple episodes ago. So go check that out. And he had a lot of a good conversation. And it's things that I notice in this beer. You can see through this camera that it's not opaque. It's dense, but it's not a stout. It's not one of those things that makes you feel so overwhelmed. I personally enjoy having more than one of these at a time. You can just go one at a time all you want, but that's fine.
Well, this is only 6.9%, which is pretty low for a holiday winter warmer.
Well, and it's funny because they've upped the ABV over the last.
That's right.
Scott came in 2014. I believe it was coming in at 4.9 at the time. Mm-hmm. So it's been growing, and I enjoy this time of year. Fall's my favorite time, and it goes well with football. It goes well with everything else that I'm doing. So it makes me, I buy more than the 6-pack. I will say it that way. How's that? Folks probably know that already from my last review, but I think it's something that I've got a couple recipes in mind that I'm probably going to do next year, because the Kolsch is in the keg at this point, folks. So the Thanksgiving Kolsch is ready. I know you guys asked about that last time, and it's going to be interesting. Maybe what we'll do is we'll plan to make one of these for ourselves next year, which means we have to probably brew it in October. So, yeah. We'll get back to you next year. That is what we'll do.
Right.
So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go pick some of this up if you like it, or if you feel like that might be something that you're into. Check out more. I'll probably put some links here in the show notes to the Grainfather if you want to check that out. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of follow-up. This is going to be a series. We're going to do some other systems too. As we get going, I hopefully, knock on wood, have an interview coming from the folks over at Pico Brew, and we'll start looking at their systems as well. And we're going to get into more of those advanced mashing techniques like we were talking about. We're going to compare some notes. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Mike, thanks for being on this show this time.
Absolutely. It was fun.
I think you're going to be a staple at this point. So, folks, you'll have a counterpoint to my voice, and I think you'll all enjoy that too. So, thanks for checking us out today. Leave your comments below with any questions, and we'll get back to you. Hope you enjoy it. Have a beer on us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cheers.